This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Hannam.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, we have a great show today. We have a lot of things to talk about. Yet again, breaking and not so breaking news, yet another international non-governmental human rights organization has determined that Israel is practicing apartheid. This is Amnesty International, one of the foremost leading human rights organizations in the world, has determined, based on its analysis, that Israel is practicing apartheid. So we'll be reviewing that report. We're going to be talking also a little bit about the State Department's action to, or inaction, I should say, to take any action against the murder of an 80-year-old Palestinian-American man at the hands of the apartheid military of Israel. We'll talk a little bit about that. We may be at the brink of war with Russia, and if we have time before we get to our interview that you did, I want to talk about Ambassador Greenfield's statement to the United Nations today, which I thought was very interesting. But in the meantime, we're going to be listening and watching a really great interview you did with the Israeli anti-apartheid activist Stavit Sinai. She's going to be talking a little bit about Israeli weapons manufacturing factories in the UK that have been shut down in an act of really great activism in the UK. We should be so lucky here in the United States, right? So a lot of great stories to talk about today.
That's
Jamal.
right, Jess. This is another bad day for Israel. And
what isn't a bad day?
And these bad days keep accelerating and basically piling up. But Israel and its surrogates are in denial. And we'll talk about, how come they remain in denial, even though, three major international organizations, two Israeli NGOs, all started using the term apartheid, and yet they are in denial. And of course, our guest, Dr. Stavit Sinai, anti-apartheid Israeli activist living in Berlin, basically she participated in the demonstrations that led to the roof takeover of a UAV engines factory, which is owned by Elbit Systems. And this is one of Israel's largest arms manufacturers and purveyor of war crimes in Palestine and beyond that. And by the way, this Elbit has like 9 or 10 factories in the UK alone and others throughout the world. So let's watch and listen to Dr. Stavit Sinai. There is a small village with 4 pubs called Shenstone in the West Midlands in England. Sounds very quaint, but it's not, as it has a factory called UAV Engines, which is owned by Elbit Systems, one of Israel's largest arms manufacturers and purveyor of war crimes in the occupied Palestinian territories and beyond. Last year in February, activists from Palestine Action climbed on the roof of an Elbit's UAV Engines factory, smashed the windows, and prevented the site from opening. Several of them were arrested, but recently the UK government prosecutors dropped criminal charges against a member of the Direct Action Group only one day before trial. Joining us to discuss this and more is Dr. Stavit Sinai, an Israeli anti-apartheid activist based in Berlin, where she teaches philosophy at a community college. She's also the author of the book Sociological Knowledge and Collective Identity, which is about Israeli sociology and settler colonialism. Welcome again to Arab Talk, Stavit.
Thank you so much, Jamal. Very happy to be here.
So for someone, let's explain, for someone who doesn't know anything about these Elbit factories, please give us a little bit of background on what happened in the UK and why activists have been targeting Elbit.
Okay, so Elbit is Israel's biggest weapon manufacturer. It's a private company, and it is quite successful in terms of profit because it promotes and markets its weaponaries, mainly drones, killer drones, because it is tested. It tests its weapon on Palestinian population with every cycle of war on Gaza. New tools of destructions are being tested. So this is why it's so successful, because it's able to market these weapons as battle proved. Israel is one of the biggest military industries in the world. I think it's the fifth biggest military industry. And this is the key to understanding why it's such an extended military industry. So as Israeli, I mean, I took action along with Ronnie Balkan, and we share some activist history together. So we went to factory in Oldham. It was last May when Israel went on another onslaught on the Gaza population, and we felt that it is quite urgent to take action, specifically against this weapon factory where they manufacture drones in Oldham. And we actually got arrested trying to break in to the factory. And the whole, if I can explain further, that the whole scope, the whole goal of these actions is basically to go and stop manufacturing of those killer drones and to dismantle the industrial process by means such as going on top of the roof, going on top of the factory, and then the factory has to close down. So we basically are able to halt manufacturing of these weapons. And I think as Israelis, who are anti-Apartheid, who are anti-Zionists, we feel the need to take action, and especially, to take action against the crime against humanity that Israel is conducting. We have a special, a great sense of duty to resist those horrible, abominable crimes. And the proper means is basically the proper and efficient means is basically direct action, in civil disobedience in the form of direct action, where us as citizens are basically able to stop the manufacturing of death.
Well, this marks I think the third major legal victory for you guys since December. The first trial ended in acquittal. It seems that the magistrate was convinced by the three activists' argument that the damage they had caused to Elbit's Chenstone factory near Birmingham was proportionate in order to prevent a greater war crime in Palestine. He found all three not guilty. And earlier this month, Palestine Action succeeded in forcing Elbit to sell one of its 10, I think, UK factories, 9 or 10 UK factories. 9 remain open, right? Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And this is a great victory, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I think everybody who is involved in Palestine Action still celebrating this news. It's like for me personally, it's as an activist, I've been an activist since my very early 20s. So more than a decade now. And this is one of the biggest achievements I've experienced as an activist. And this is due to I mean, the fact that we've managed to shut down the Oldham factory is a collective effort that is based on direct action and not in the form of appealing to the authorities to ask for permission for a demonstration or to ask for consideration. These methods are they're perhaps proper, but they are not effective. And having taken action in the form of breaking the law, this is actually breaking the law proper. But there is certain situations where it is that you have to break the law, like you have to take action. You cannot, we cannot come into terms with the fact that we have Elbit manufacturing weapons all across Europe. By the way, it's here in Berlin that it's happening.
Well, my next question was, I was going to ask you, why was England chosen by Elbit? I mean, is this something the British government is involved with? Is it something that the British government is invested in?
I cannot tell you why exactly they choose to manufacture there in England. I think it's based purely on profit. I think it's profitable for. I mean, England has industrial infrastructure. It has history of industrial. There are factories. There is workforce, and it chooses to manufacture there. And by the way, it exports its weaponry all across the world to oppressing Kashmir population. So the crimes Israel is conducting in Palestine are not exclusive to Palestine, but it's kind of has a wider global effect on the damage it inflicts upon the entire human population.
I was trying to read about the I guess the citizens where these factories of those towns or villages where these factories are put in place, and some were against what you've done and some were supporting it. Some were kind of saying, well, these factories provide jobs, for the village. But a lot of people also supported your action.
Actually, thank you. So actually, this specific factory where which we targeted in Oldham has a history of resisting crimes against humanity. For example, in the times of slavery, workers in that specific factory, they refused to cooperate to process cotton that was picked up by slaves. So the region has a history of resisting crimes on such scale. So for sure, some people would disapprove, but as activists or as revolutionaries, as dissidents, it is not my concern. My concern is to stop, is to destroy, is to smash, to dismantle, to destroy the means of production by which Israel facilitates crimes. If it has negative consequences to somebody, Palestinian lives are the top priority here.
How has this been playing out in the Israeli media?
I don't think it has any cover in Israeli media. I believe there is a complete. I think Israeli media is completely overlooking this achievement, or the fact that its factories are being targeted at the moment. I haven't seen. I read Israeli media every day. I haven't seen any covering, but yet again, our actions are not receiving any covering whatsoever. So it's a non-item. But But I think that shutting down Elbit factory is something historical. I truly see it in this way. This is an historic achievement. Palestine Action is making history. And the goal is to finish the job and to continue the hard work. There's like massive mobilization efforts of people, and continuing to extending that activity in order to shut the rest of the factories. And specifically in Oldham, there were 36 activists being arrested. So people are putting themselves on the line. They're putting their bodies, their criminal records, their good names on the line. But it's been proven quite successful.
Let me be clear here. You are not stranger to controversy or getting arrested, because last time I've had you on the show, you got arrested in Germany for demonstrating against a visiting, I guess, Israeli minister. And now, I mean, you made it all the way to England.
Yeah, we're international, going international. I mean, getting involved, seeing the inside of a prison cell is not something that should be foreign to any activist. I think this is why it's been so effective, because people were taking that risk. They were putting themselves, their bodies on the line, while getting arrested can be very violent. Sometimes you cannot predict the reaction of the police. They are not to be trusted, of course. Getting arrested, spending a night in jail, going to court procedures, getting in conflict with the authorities is a part of the job, is a part of what being an activist is. If one wants to inflict like an effective action, it means it involves getting into seeing the prison cell from within. And I think that's the only way. I think people should it's not about talking in social, tweeting or writing stuff on social media. It's about putting yourself on the line, being able to make a sacrifice. So this kind of activity is sacrificial, if you can say. This is a sacrificial action, and it works actually. Like Roni and I were seeing what our comrades in the UK were doing, and we just very instinctively told each other, okay, we gotta go. And Palestine Action, some of its members, we were in contact. They came here to Berlin in order to participate in our trial with the Humboldt case. So this is how the connections were built up, and we've seen their works. We were really influenced, really inspired by what they were doing, and we say, okay, we're coming. And
You're definitely you and Rani are very dedicated. And for those who haven't seen your previous interview, just again, you're an Israeli who's anti-apartheid. I guess you served in the Israeli army before you kind of changed your whole perspective. Maybe you should tell us a little bit about that, because I want to ask you next, because you're an anti-apartheid Israeli, and this is something that should be good news to your ears. Amnesty International, the widely respected human rights group, plans to release, I think just within the next 24 hours, I don't know if you read that, a report accusing Israel of committing apartheid and describing its existence as a Jewish state as deprivation of Palestinians' basic rights. Of course, Israeli officials on Sunday denounced the report as anti-Semitism. I mean, that's what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I would have to take a look at it. I'm very always kind of skeptical when a big NGO is...
Well, this is not the first time. I mean, last time we talked, about it, Human Rights Watch issued its report, which made a lot of news headlines in the media. The Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem also now uses the word apartheid, and now Amnesty International, I think they're recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize a few years ago. So I think that's a big deal, don't you think so?
I am very critical. I'm always very, very skeptical. So I would have to read it on my own. But I have to tell you, in this regards, most of the NGOs and like official organizations that are dealing with the subject, with the matter, and they usually apply the term apartheid only to what is being known as the minor occupation, the minor apartheid in '67, whereas Israel commits the crime of apartheid within the whole land, from the river to the sea, even specifically in the 48 region where I'm from.
Well, we've recently, I think it also made headlines. We've seen what Israel has been doing to the Bedouins in the Negev, right? So that's within 1948.
Yeah, and it applies its apartheid even beyond its territory. That means that my friends here who are Germans, who carry German passport and also have Palestinian origins, still don't have the same rights as I have when, for example, coming to visit. Or so apartheid is applied even beyond the unofficial borders of apartheid Israel. But I think it's not, I have to emphasize something very crucial. It is not the policies of Israel that we are criticizing. We're not criticizing occupation in '67 or settlements or even what's happening with the Bedouins. These are all horrendous crimes. But our critique, let's say Ronnie's and my critique, is not about that. It's not about the policies. It's about the essence of the entire colonialist, Zionist, supremacist project. And this is something very crucial to understand. It's not about if Israel would change one of its policies and would behave better, that we would accept its legitimacy. It is not a legitimate entity. It never had legitimacy. It was never a democracy. It is a racist, supremacist state that is built on power, on force, on violence, and with intention of maintaining that violence, with intention of maintaining its supremacist demographic project. And this is all these horrendous crimes that are happening within the framework of trying to basically eliminate Palestinian population just based on its cultural or just being defined as a different group, consists the crime of apartheid. It answers all the essential criteria of what the apartheid crime is, according to the Rome Statute. And it is also very important to remember, this crime is on par with genocide. So this is no petty crime we're talking about. And very important to emphasize, it's not about the occupation. It's about the entire apartheidist project that Israel is conducting, not just from '67, but from its very inception.
Well, I mean, I get that, but not too many people will. I mean, just to be, I don't have to use the word pragmatic. Seeing the Israeli society accepting. I mean, I see more and more maybe of the youth talking about apartheid, but actually accepting the premise that the whole state was built on supremacy, etc. And I mean, I don't see that going anywhere within the Israeli society. I mean, you don't see these little advances like now on the international level that actually, Amnesty International is using that word and Human Rights Watch. That's not going to advance kind of the outlook or the future outlook.
Look, so when it comes to Israeli society in itself, I really have no hope. The change would not come from within. This is one of the reasons I have also left. The waves of racism and brutalism were overwhelming, and the entire Israeli society supports it, takes part of it. Every family has at least one family member that is a part of the military or security industry. So they are all highly invested within the crime. So they all profit from this crime. And the hope would not come from within. It would only come from the outside with international pressure, with BDS, which is an extremely important campaign. And we also see Israel is doing its utmost in order to suppress people supporting BDS, which just goes to show that it is effective, and if Israel wants it down, then it must be effective. So we have new frameworks today that we didn't have in the past to exert pressure on the state of Israel, and we have to continue. We have to continue struggling, even if there's no hope. We have to continue. And even if there's no successes, we have to persist. We have to continue no matter what. On the way now, we also see some success. So that's quite reassuring now with the shutting down of the Elbit factory. We've cost tremendous. Palestine Action have cost tremendous amount of damages, measured in millions of pounds, many days of work lost. They're going to have to now shut down their factory and relocate, maybe not. So this is the huge bearing on this industry. And I think Palestine Action are really paving the way forward. They really do.
Stavit Sinai, thank you for coming on Arab Talk.
Thank you, Jamal. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
That's the voice and the face of Dr. Stavit Sinai, Israeli anti-apartheid activist living in Berlin right now, talking about this tremendous and really amazing campaign carried out in the UK to basically confront and shut down some factories that were basically manufacturing weapons of war for the apartheid regime against innocent civilians, not just in Palestine, but many other places too. Very compelling, Jamal. That was really very compelling to hear what she had to say.
Well, the interesting thing, Jess, is that several activists were arrested, and then recently the British magistrate dropped charges. This is like a third case against the activists, and recently the magistrate dropped charges and pretty much sided with the activists, saying that their action, even though some of the action violated the law, meaning occupying a building, etc., that had a higher purpose by stopping a more violent crime, or stopping basically a manufacturer, war crimes. So that was a big blow to Elbit Systems and the Israeli government. And the interesting thing about it, the Israeli media has been ignoring this. The American media has totally ignored this. So it's really headlines in the UK and in Europe, but they're trying to keep it, under wrap.
Well, Jamal, this is part of the Israeli-American Hasbara campaign, that the Israeli and American media are silent on these aggressive actions. I will say, though, what's interesting, and this is somewhat related, is that there was an expose in the Washington Post about the company that manufactured the Pegasus software that's been responsible for spying. It led to the death of Jamal Khashoggi directly. It's also been, this Israeli spyware has been sent to many regimes despotic regimes that are using it against journalists and opponents of various regimes. But interestingly, Jamal, this has also been used against American ambassadors and American diplomats throughout the world. And here, the Washington Post has printed this expose, Jamal, but have we heard anything from the State Department? Have we heard anything from the U.S. government about this country, this so-called ally, the apartheid regime, which has a history of spying on the United States and now a history of developing this spyware, in addition, that has spied on our own diplomats? So this story about Elbit Systems and what's happening in the UK and the shutting down of the factories and the Pegasus software, when you say it's not a good day for the Israelis, I would say it's not a good year, it's not a good decade. And this is more and more evidence that the world continues to confront about not just the apartheid practices, but its participation in the death of innocent civilians, not just in Palestine, but outside. But what do we say about an ally that spies on the United States?
With friends
Jamal?
like this, who needs enemies? That's what I would say. But here is the irony in it all, Jess. You said this wasn't, and it is not big news right here in this country. It wasn't big news also in Israel until the Israelis themselves discovered that their own government was using this software to spy on them. So now they are talking about it.
Right. Well, Netanyahu apparently used it on some of his opponents when he was the prime minister. So yeah, I think finally they're taking notice in it. But this Pegasus software, Jamal, is it's when you dig deep into it, I want to recommend, that our viewers and listeners take a look at this expose in the Washington Post. When you dig deep into it, the reach of this software, its impact, its ability to monitor and spy on you using your iPhone, it's very disturbing.
Well, we've said it last time. I think it behooves every American official to check their phones, their cell phones.
But I kind of want to go back to this, Jamal, because you and I and Arab Talk are one of the few, if not the only news presenting group in our podcast and our live broadcast here on KPOO. We're the only ones that are really talking about Pegasus, talking about Elbit Systems. We're the only ones talking about this, and you're not going to hear anything about our next story, which is the fact that Amnesty International, one of the foremost international human rights organizations in the world, and one of the oldest, together with Human Rights Watch, together with B'Tselem, has identified the apartheid regime of Israel as practicing apartheid yet again, Jamal. So how many times do we have?
How many evidences? How many pieces of evidence you need to submit? But you're absolutely right, Jess. Amnesty International, it's widely respected. Just to remind our listeners, also it won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1977. Now, we have looked at a copy of this report. It's officially going to be released on Tuesday, and the Israeli government has been, with the help of its surrogates, have been asking Amnesty International not to release it. I haven't seen them doing this with Human Rights Watch. Of course, we saw the usual condemnation and accusation of anti-Semitism, etc. But now, we have basically a few hours they're vehemently trying to stop Amnesty International from releasing it, and basically the report, and we have some quotations here. It's accusing, of course, Israel of committing apartheid and describing its existence as a Jewish state as the privation of Palestinians' basic rights. And the difference, this is very important, a very important point I want to make, between Amnesty International's report and Human Rights Report. Human Rights Report only talks about the West Bank and the Gaza, talks post 1967.
Yes.
Amnesty, why they're freaking out about Amnesty International? Because it goes to the beginning, to the beginning of the state of
Yes.
Israel. It's a
Yes.
211-page report, and it alleges widespread attack directed against Palestinians that amounts, and I'm quoting, to the crimes against humanity of apartheid. And this is what I said. The like Amnesty International has condemned Israel many times. The most kind of like biggest and the most recent one was after the 2014 attack on Gaza. So they issued a report, but they didn't use the word apartheid. And of course we've mentioned many times before, there are two Israeli human rights organizations, the two largest, Yesh Yadin and B'Tselem. They also now have been using apartheid. So now this comes kind of like two Israeli NGOs
Exactly.
and human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, and now Amnesty International.
Can I add just one other thing, Jamal?
Just
that
one
I found
one
very
minute. I read
Oh,
for
yeah.
you the very important point that I was making, because I wanted to make sure that I have the correct language. And this is what it says. Since its establishment in 1948, Israel has pursued an explicit policy of establishing and maintaining a Jewish demographic hegemony and maximizing its control over land to benefit Jewish Israelis while minimizing the number of Palestinians and restricting their rights and obstructing their ability to challenge this disposition. So that's kind of like the damning
That's
evidence.
very strong. Well, I think it's an extremely strong statement. It probably goes further than Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem. But what I found interesting were also some quotes, Jamal, that didn't separate the claim and the determination and the conclusion of Israeli apartheid just in the occupied West Bank, but for Palestinians throughout historic Palestine. So I find that really compelling, because they're saying apartheid is practiced not just amongst Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza, but there's also a pattern and practice consistent with apartheid for Palestinians living in historic Palestine and what we refer to as 1948
And those are
Palestine.
Israeli
So
citizens.
They're exactly, precisely,
Second
they're
class,
Israeli
third
citizens.
class, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, and including the Bedouin villages and Bedouin communities that we've reported on extensively here, that they continue to uproot and ethnically cleanse on a regular basis. So this, I could see, Jamal, why Amnesty International, the Israeli government, is trying to stop this report from coming out. It's damning, it's biting, it's incisive. It is impossible, in my humble opinion, to contradict in any compelling way.
And of
Here's
course,
the thing.
just a spokesperson for Israel's foreign ministry called the report pure anti-Semitism that legitimizes attacks against Jews and accused Amnesty International of a double standard. Major Jewish American groups condemned the report, calling it baseless and one-sided. And by the way, Amnesty said that the report is the result of 4 years of research on Israeli law, zoning plans, government, military directives, and statements by Israeli diplomatic and evidence of violations of international human rights over past decades. They've done their homework. I mean, you're not talking about a fly-by-night organization.
Exactly, Jamal. This is not a fly-by-night organization. They won the Nobel Peace Prize. But here's the thing that I love about how really, I'm trying to find the right word here, Jamal, how really stupid and ignorant the Israeli Hasbarists are. Because if they said nothing, people might, in general, find out some information about the Amnesty International report, but it could fly under the radar. The very fact that the Israeli Hasbaristas are screaming at the top of their lungs is just going to do the opposite. So the Israelis never miss an opportunity to shoot themselves in the foot. They're going to do it again. Nobody buys the anti-Semitism claim against Amnesty International. It's, as you said before, as I've said, when you level claims of anti-Semitism like that, you do a great disservice and injustice to the real anti-Semitism that occurs on a regular basis all over the world. So it's It's disgusting that the Israeli government officials are claiming that Amnesty International is anti-Semitic. And of course, it's going to bring even more attention to this report. And, thank you for the free advertising is what Amnesty should be saying to the Israeli government.
Also, the topic of double standard. Well, I do happen to subscribe to Amnesty International feed on Twitter. And I can tell you, they've always condemning Egypt,
They do.
for its violation of human rights, and many Arab countries. They always condemning Saudi Arabia.
Always.
And talking about apartheid, in 2017, Amnesty International released a report that said Myanmar's treatment of the Rohingya minority amounts to apartheid. So they've also accused another country of apartheid. So they cannot say they're kind of being selective, because that's also the two kind of line of defense that the Israeli officials they use. They always say, that's anti-Semitism. That's just kind of to totally shut you down. And then the other one is they say, oh, you're picking on Israel. What about this? The what aboutism that they always say.
What about it? What it doesn't make sense, because Amnesty is an equal opportunity, critic, and they have criticized elements of the Palestinian. They've criticized elements of the Palestinian government too.
And here is a funny thing, Jess. Israeli officials, and you can go to their Twitter feed, you could go to what Netanyahu said, you could go to their foreign minister. They're always quoting Amnesty International when Amnesty criticizes Iran. They always refer to it.
Always.
But when Amnesty criticizes Israeli apartheid, suddenly their tune changes.
Yeah, well, this is why no one listens anymore to the Hasbaristas, Jamal. And the only thing, when we talk about the marathon confronting apartheid, the Israeli regime, the Israeli apartheid regime, when we're talking about this marathon race, we're winning this race. And we have Amnesty, we have Human Rights Watch, we have the international community. What we don't have are the cowards within our own government, within the State Department, within the Congress, who are acting with cowardice, and many of whom are going to
currently mounting a defense for Israel.
Exactly. The biggest defenders of the apartheid regime is the U.S. Congress and the State Department. They cower at being called anti-Semitic and are going to cower to the Hasbaristas and the talking points of the apartheid regime. This will come home to roost against all of the people who are on the wrong side of history, Jamal, because as it turns out, the Israeli apartheid regime is on the wrong side of history. The U.S. Congress is on the wrong side of history. Our State Department and our executive branch, when it comes to confronting these apartheid practices, are on the wrong side of history. And this, I have to say this, Jamal, because it was so upsetting, again, talking about the double standard. You had our UN ambassador speaking at the United Nations today, Ambassador Greenfield, who said to the Security Council and to the world, condemning Russia for what they were doing in the Ukraine right now. And she had the audacity to say, no people should be occupied. No people should have to live under different rule. No people should have to worry about...
nose just getting longer and longer.
You could say that with a straight face, that no people should have to live under occupation. No people should have to live with the threat of military force. No people should have to live by a government that they don't want. You have the audacity to say that, Ambassador Greenfield, at a time when your claim of one of your strongest allies is practicing a vicious kind of apartheid for over 70 years now.
Complaining about Russia, being in Crimea when you bless Israel for annexing 100%. The Syrian Golan Heights.
No, exactly right, Jamal.
Well,
this is why when I heard Greenfield today, I was sickened. We hear that we listen to these double standards, these hypocrites, in the Congress and in the State Department. And here you have the U.S. ambassador, again, saying these what sound like really wonderful things, but why is it only the case for one group of people, but not for the totality of people who are confronting this this grotesque form of apartheid in Palestine right now?
Well, here's the thing, Jess. Israeli officials and surrogates right here in Congress would rather label anyone who calls out Israel for its apartheid practices as an anti-Semite rather than work towards dismantling apartheid. I mean, this is what they should be working rather, and we've seen that. This is what happened with South Africa. South Africa, the apartheid regime of South Africa, vilified all its critics until its regime came tumbling down. So
exactly, we're in the same boat, and I think we're in the same. Absolutely, that's a great analysis, Jamal. And I think we're in the same situation now. I mean, Ronald Reagan, up until the bitter end, was defending apartheid South Africa at the time when the world was turning against it. And guess what? I have breaking news for all the Israeli Hasbaristas and all the members of Congress. You're on the wrong side of history. The entire world knows this. Anybody who believes in justice knows this. Israel is an apartheid state. And unless its apartheid structure is dismantled, this form of grotesque apartheid will only grow, and it will cause problems not just for Palestinians, but it's going to cause problems for really the entire world. And I'll just say it again, Jamal, because screaming anti-Semitism right now hurts all people who've been subjected to anti-Semitism. So this is actually the Israeli Hasbaristas making it more dangerous for people, and it's making them more unsafe. So it's really disturbing.
You're listening to Arab Talk on KPO San Francisco 89.5 FM. I want to shift gears here, Jess. This is a topic that we'll keep talking about until
absolutely
the State Department does something about this. And this is the murder of an 80-year-old Palestinian man, basically an Palestinian-American man, who basically was blindfolded, was strapped, thrown face down on the zip. Yeah, exactly. And the soldiers left him uncuffed. He was blindfolded and gagged, I should say, and then he died. And then Israel has been trying to kind of dance its way as usual around this by saying, well, he's old, he might have had a heart attack. So recently an autopsy has been performed, and it concluded that Asad, his name, died of a stress-induced sudden cardiac arrest due to external injuries. So now
external injuries, not internal injuries.
Yeah.
Yes.
So now we have some evidence to what happened to him, and meanwhile the United States has been saying, we're just going to investigate. And Asad was a former Milwaukee, Wisconsin resident who lived most of his life in the United States, and decided about 10 years ago to return kind of after he retired, and basically he has been murdered. And so further to this investigation, and why I want to keep talking about it, because this is not an anomaly, this is not an accident, this is not like, the battalion in charge, it's called the Kfir Infantry Brigade. I've been doing some homework on this because it really has bugged the hell out of me, made many of us very angry. Has been involved in several killings, controversies, torture, beating, etc., regarding violence against Palestinian detainees. And this is from the Israeli media. I'm not pulling this out of from my hat. I've done my homework looking to see what is this Kfir Brigade. For example, just last October, they've arrested, a Palestinian and sexually assaulted this Palestinian in the back of a military vehicle after he was arrested. Okay. In 2019, 5 of its soldiers and their commanding officer were held, who held the rank of a lieutenant, were arrested and
Yes.
placed on trial for severely beating a father and son whom they had detained. They were basically charged with aggravated abuse and let go, they didn't serve any time. In 2015, a soldier serving in the battalion was accused of attaching electrodes to a Palestinian detainee's neck and,
I remember that.
and electrocuting him.
I remember that.
And when the detainee pleaded with him to stop, he increased the voltage. Several days later, I think he was admitted to the hospital and in serious condition. I don't know exactly what happened to him. And the soldier was sentenced to 7 months in prison, but he only served 1 month, and 6 months he served them at home. So this is the type of soldiers,
Torture.
occupation
Yeah.
soldiers. So when they try to say, well, it's an accident, they didn't know what happened to him, that maybe he was sick.
Yeah,
this was intentional, and
completely
these soldiers have a long record of committing basically war crimes against civilians.
That's exactly right, Jamal. I would call it state-sponsored, state-supported torture against civilians, and they're getting away with murder. We're going to follow this story, Jamal. We're not going to let it rest. This is an American
our
citizen.
ask to the State Department
Investigate.
to send a team, not to rely on Israeli investigators. They have to send an American team. This is an American citizen who was murdered.
Send the FBI. Send the FBI.
And not just sweep it under the rug,
Absolutely.
as we've seen in other cases like this. This is very important.
We're not going to sweep this under the rug.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download our latest shows, and we will talk to you next week.
We'll see you next week.